What's your dodged a bullet story? When I was a dumb young woman, I lived in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. I worked in an area that could be very sketchy after dark. One night after work I got really drunk. I stumbled into a taxi to head home. So drunk I'm not even sure how I gave him my address. When we arrived I started digging in my pocket for cash to pay the taxi driver, and he reached over and said, "No, no baby. I'm not a taxi. I just wanted to make sure you got home okay." Apparently I had just jumped into a random car. I will be forever grateful to this stranger and much more careful in my after-work decisions. I was this person for somebody once, not for anyone in the Virgin Islands, but in the town I went to college. I was heading out to pick up a friend from work late on a Friday when this girl staggered into the street in front of me, waving her arms. In the middle of her confused and scared stammering I gathered that she lived somewhere a couple blocks over, but had no clue where she was anymore. I drove her home, staying until I saw her make it up the stairs and into her apartment. It hit me later that if she ran in front of the wrong person, she'd have a very different end to the night. I'm glad I was there, but that thought still scares me. Similar story. One night in college, I was driving around with two friends in the car. We had to stop at a red light, right outside the bars on Main Street, when we hear a tapping on the front passenger window. My friend rolled down the window and we see a guy standing there, supporting a visibly wasted girl. "Hey, she's really drunk, can she get a ride home?" he asked us. "Sure, hop in," I tell him. My friend in the back scoots over to the left side to make room for the pair, as much room as is possible in a Ford Escort. Homeboy on the street opens the back door, plops the girl in the back seat, then shuts the door. My friends and I look at each other in confusion and ask him, "Aren't you coming with?" "Nah man, I'm good," he says and walks away down the street. By this point the light has turned green, so we have to go. Fortunately she was able to tell us which apartment complex she lived in and we were able to drop her off safely. It's a fairly safe college town, but still, not a smart move. I, too, did something similar as a dumb young woman about 25 years ago. I got drunk in a bar alone after work, chatted up some random dude, and let him walk me several blocks to my apartment. I have only the vaguest memory flashes of slipping off the bar stool, stumbling off a curb, yammering away at this guy while somehow navigating a very busy urban street, and then leaving him at the entrance to my building as the doorman looked on, probably quite disapprovingly. I awakened several hours later in a vomit-soaked blanket, but I was at least in my own bed alone and fully dressed. Ugh. Things could have ended so much worse. Had gallstones and the doctor gave me a choice between surgery to remove the gallbladder or antibiotics. I choose the surgery, which is very unlike me. When they started the surgery they found out the gallbladder had burst and the stones were in my body cavity. What was supposed to be a short procedure through the belly button turned into a 10 incision to remove the stones. I was supposed to leave the hospital that day, but it turned into a week. However, if I chose antibiotics and went home with a burst gallbladder, I probably would have died of sepsis. I was on my way to Taco Bell in the back of a friend's small truck. The cab was full, so I was in the bed. We passed by my apartment on the way and I chose to have him drop me off. It was a bit chilly in the open air back there. By the time I got into my apartment I had a Snapchat from the driver. It was a picture of his totaled truck. While he was stopped at an intersection, a drunk driver approached from the opposite direction going 100 plus. The driver clipped a bus, causing an abrupt stop and his whole engine to rip out of his car, fly through the intersection and into my friend's truck where I had been riding, unseat-belted moments before. None of my friends were injured. I think both the people in the other car died. Edit. To the dozens of people saying that my friends were only involved in the accident because of the deviation to drop me off, you are not wrong. But it still feels like I dodged bullet. Furthermore, the route from point A to point Taco Bell went directly past my apartment on a low-speed residential street. The time it took for me to hop out of the back as they drove by added maybe 30 seconds to their journey. In a small, rural college town at night, this may have made enough of a difference. But if we had been there earlier, maybe we would have been turning into the intersection and I'd have been broadsided by the flying engine instead of it hitting my friend's car head on. Who knows? I'm just happy to be alive. Dude. I had one like this. When I was a kid, my family was going to take a 10-minute drive to the nearby beach to hang out on a Sunday afternoon. My dad had to work after, so he and my mom were going to drive separately, and he was leaving first. On his way out the door he said, "Want to ride with me?" My brain said yeah, since I was ready to go and I don't get along well with my mom. So I was astonished when my mouth said, "Nah, I'll ride with mom." It was literally like someone had used my body to say something against my will. I was too shocked to say anything else and he shrugged and left. When we, finally, got to the beach, we didn't see my dad there, but it's a long beach and the parking area is huge, so we weren't worried. A few minutes later, though, my mom calls me back and tells me we have to go to the hospital. Dad was in a car accident on the way to the beach. Yeah, there are multiple routes and we took different ones. He was okay, just bumps and bruises. Then I got a look at the photos of his car after the accident. The passenger side, where I would definitely have been sitting if I had successfully said yeah, was totally obliterated. Still gives me chills to this day. Whoa, and I had one as well. It was a weekend and we decided to drive down to town to hang out with friends. The road there was this long narrow road passing through some neighborhoods that usually takes forever, and it's common for drivers to overtake the slower vehicles. For some odd reason that day, the car in front of us was super slow and DH was wanting to overtake so we can get on with our day. Something told me that it was a dumb idea and we should just be patient. I told DH that, adding that we have all the time in the world and there's no reason to rush. Thankfully DH agreed and slowed down to enjoy the drive. At the intersection, a random car sped out front the left and crashed right into the vehicle in front of us. It was so sudden and out of nowhere that DH and I were stunned. The impact was so hard that the car in front of us actually spun 360. Both cars had their windows shattered, though thankfully both drivers and passenger of the car that got hit was okay. The crash victims were okay because their car was one of those old cars. Sorry, I'm not familiar with cars, can't tell you what type it is, that had a sizable front and looks pretty heavy, the kind of car that looks really rectangular and boxy, like an old Volvo, so the people in there weren't hurt. Every time I think back to that day, it gives me the shivers. You see, the car that we were in was a tiny compact two-door Hyundai with not much leeway in the front. Had I not said anything and let my husband cut in front of that car, I'm pretty sure at the very least my husband and I would both end up in the hospital. The Hyundai wouldn't have survived the crash impact and would most likely be totaled and thrown into the nearby line of parked cars, causing further damage. I thanked whichever lucky star I had that day. That was a seriously close call. Hose jacks are awful. I spent 2 years in the automotive program at my local junior college. There were a few horror stories from the staff about their experiences in the industry. One teacher told us a story about a person they knew that was driving in a snowstorm with his girlfriend and he got a flat tire. He pulled over to the side of the road and used one of those jacks to raise his car to change the tire. While he was underneath the car trying to get the tire off, a snowplow drove by and the snow knocked the car off the jack and the car crushed the goo. I've got an almost literal dodged a bullet. I was cutting a tree with a chainsaw. The saw wasn't mine, it was old, and I don't know how well maintained it was. The chain broke and came whipping back at me. I didn't even react, it was too fast. I didn't feel any pain. I turned and saw the chain was hanging, half stuck into a tree behind me at head/neck level. The tree was directly behind me, in a straight line from the chainsaw. Somehow the chain whipped off, curved around my head/neck and buried itself in a tree 3 feet behind me. If it had gone straight, I would be dead or disfigured. I didn't even try and take the chain with me. I just called it a day, walked off, and didn't pick up another chainsaw for about 6 or 7 years. Whew. Edit, I was also shot at while delivering pizza. I missed my turn in a rural area and used a gravel driveway to turn around. It was wooded on both sides, so I went down farther than I should. I finally turned around and saw a guy with a bolt-action rifle in a little field off to the side of the driveway. Saw him raise the rifle in my direction, saw/heard him shoot. Never heard the bullet pass, and it didn't hit my car, so I think he was just trying to scare me. It worked. I peeled out, flinging gravel, and made it back to the road. Because of our positions, this asshole shot back towards the road, maybe 200 yards, and there were houses on the other side of the road. It was wooded, but that's not a shot I would have ever taken, beyond the obvious reasons. Mine is pretty similar with a chainsaw. I used to trim trees. Once I had dropped a bunch of branches to the ground and some were pretty decent sized and the ground crew had not got to them. I would usually come down, fire up the saw and cut them down to smaller, more manageable size. On the day it happened, for some reason I ran back to the truck and put on my chaps. First cut I made, the saw kicked out and laid against the inside of my left thigh. If I had not put of the chaps that day, I probably would have bled to death long before anything could have been done. Left me with a bruise from right at my knee to just about my balls. Me and my girlfriend at the time were traveling from New Zealand to my family back home in Sweden. We both decided to spend a bit more money to fly back, to NZ, through Paris instead of Amsterdam, just because we wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. It cost us maybe an extra $50 and we got to see it on the landing and then take off, but never actually set foot in Paris proper because we were poor students. When we landed in Auckland, New Zealand, jet-lagged to shit, we turn on our phones and notice that we have about 50 missed calls from our travel agent, which was odd. When we call her, she sounds super relieved and out of breath. She tells us the flight she originally suggested to us, the one from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was shot down over Ukraine. My brain couldn't process that information at the time, but once I woke up the next day it hit me like a ton of bricks. $50 made the difference between seeing the big steel thingy that has so many photos of it and being sent to Sweden in body bags piece by piece. I stayed out of the house overnight while in high school. My dad was pissed off and told me that I better be home that night. I didn't listen and instead stayed at a friend's house with my girlfriend. At around 2 a.m. a kid from high school drove a Denali into my house. It ran directly into my room and destroyed my room, bed, and anything else around. He was estimated to be going around 60 miles per hour. My dad is blind and thought that I may have been in the room. He was searching for me frantically, my mother said. I remember getting a ton of phone calls from home knowing that I was going to get into trouble for staying out against my parents' wished. The next day when my GF dropped me off at home, I found a massive woodboard and tarp covering my room. I would definitely not be here today if I had stayed home that night. Best case scenario, I'd be a paraplegic. I guess sometimes it does pay to not listen to your parents. I actually have a similar story, except I was there. My house has a T intersection directly in front of it. The single street is aimed at my room. I was sleeping and heard a big ass boom. Went outside to look and see a car that slammed into my house. It had just barely hit the corner of my house with the corner of the car, which kept it from basically entering my room. My room was half underground and my bed is up against that wall in the same corner of the room. The car was basically like 10 inches from being on top of me. A young 16-year-old girl was driving, father in the passenger seat. Talked to him and she is mentally handicapped and this was her very first time driving. She put the gas to the floor instead of the brake and barreled over the curb, through my bushes and into my house. Had she moved to the right maybe 10 to 20 inches, that car could have been on top of me since it's half underground. This is the most recent dodge for me and just happened a couple of weeks ago. We visit my in-laws every single Saturday for dinner. We leave around the same time and take the same exact route home. This time, I realized we forgot something, so I told my husband to get into the other lane to go straight and head back to their house instead of taking the exit for the highway. We are sitting at the red light and suddenly a loud screeching sound of someone slamming on their brakes as they try to not go through the red light in the lane we were supposed to be in. Then another person follows suit and slams right into them. The second person hit so hard she knocked herself out and knocked the first car through the intersection, and they went about 75 feet. I just had back surgery, so it would not have ended so well for us. The girl in the second car had no idea what happened. This is a story of my almost being murdered by a now convicted murderer. Back around 2007 I wanted to learn to scuba dive. I signed up at my local dive shop in Spokane, WA. Having never done a course like this before, I really wasn't sure what to expect. Everyone was super chill, including the instructors. I knew scuba was kind of dangerous, so maybe these guys were just trying to keep people calm and focused by being kind of pranksters. We go through the entire course over several weeks and schedule our open water dive in the Hood Canal during spring. We're talking 40 degrees outside and water that's around 38 degrees. First big clue something wasn't right is they gave me a wetsuit that was way too big. They knew it was too big, laughed about it being too big, but gave it to me anyway. For those that don't know, wetsuits only work correctly when they are directly connected to your skin. Any gap eliminates the benefits. Same thing happened to me and the boulder shooting. I live next door to the King Soopers. I had just gotten back to Boulder after taking a few days to enjoy Silverthorne. While there, I got a photo of this fox that I had been trying to get for years. It was a super elaborate shoot that needed a fair bit of post-processing, and I keep my editing computer at my studio. I ran home to get cleaned up and was going to go get some lunch at King Soopers, as I did just about every day, but was way too excited to put this photo together, so I just headed straight to the office instead. I get there and a colleague was like, "Oh shit, there is a shooting going on at King Soopers. 10 dead." That photo holds a lot of significance to me now. Edit, here is the picture for those asking. When I was in my 20s in the UK drinking with my friends, two brothers offered to give me and friend Tommy a ride into Doncaster, which was about 8 miles away, to go to a club. We declined because they were leaving at that moment but weren't ready yet. The older brother worked for a car dealership and was always driving different new cars. Porsche, BMW, etc. This particular night he was in a fancy new BMW. He was driving, brother in the passenger seat and their two girlfriends in the back seat. Maybe an hour later we jumped into a taxi and set off to Doncaster. About 4 miles into the journey we came to a police roadblock and had to turn around and go a different route. The next day we found out there had been a crash. The car was totally ripped apart. The driver had gone around a bend and lost control and ran into a 3x3 brick column. The two brothers and one of the girls died on impact. As the car had ripped open, the remaining girl basically kept going down the street in her seat. I think they put her in a coma until she had healed some. She lived but was very badly hurt. At their funeral I was talking to one of the driver's co-workers and he said, I can't believe he tried to go around that bend like that. We all know BMWs can't corner. Very sad, but me and my best friend dodged a bullet. This happened at least 20 years ago.